evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 8th episode of our weekly podcast, Just Politics, Our Worldview, where we discuss politics in Barbados, the region, and the rest of the world. Remember that you can find us here live every Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. Each week, I'm grateful for the support that we continue to get from you who choose to join us, and also for Sasha Lee, who continues to manage our social media posts and marketing. Thank you for joining us, and welcome again to our show. I am your host, Ayo Olara, and these are my co-hosts, Devron Bruce. Hi, Devron.
Hey, everyone.
And Dr. Terry Harris. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Ayo. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so this week we have as a guest, Mr. Corey Sandiford, who is a seasoned political analyst, having spent the past 15 years in the trenches of political research across the region. So Corey is very experienced. He's also the co-director of the Caribbean Development Research Services, or CADRIS. He's a research analyst specializing in qualitative research. Welcome to the show, Corey.
I had to drag my cursor all the way across the screen. Thanks.
That's okay.
Evening all. Good evening.
Good evening, Corey. This week's episode is brought to you by Thinking Analytics. They're builders of data models in Barbados and the Caribbean. You can send them an email at thinkinganalytics@gmail.com. And now over to you, Ayo, for the weekly roundup.
Thank you, Terry. And welcome back and welcome to the weekly roundup. The United Nations has declassified marijuana as a dangerous drug, or rather from being a dangerous drug like heroin, fentanyl, and other opioids. They're now classified as a medicine. Look, I know that laws usually reflect the intellect of the times, and so I applaud them for entering the 21st century. But there has got to be some sort of restitution for those people over the years who were charged or incarcerated for this plant, which a myriad of other groups have said over and over was mostly harmless. It would also be a miscarriage of justice to simply allow other groups to enrich themselves, whilst many who suffer the fallout from engaging in medicinal, recreational, or spiritual use remain unable to reap remunerations from marijuana, a substance that is basically a part of their everyday life. There's also the fact that in predominantly white countries, people of color are disproportionately in prison for marijuana use, whilst in majority Black countries, poor people bear the brunt of the punishment. This is not to say that other groups do not use marijuana. They definitely do. I don't think that I have to mention that due to our history, poor people in Barbados tend to be Black. So yes, restitution needs to take place as we move towards universal decriminalization or legalization of cannabis. And the director of the COVID monitoring unit here in Barbados wants police support when officers from that unit are carrying out their duties, mainly when dealing with the public sector, the public service vehicles, PSVs. Look, I try not to be too critical on these men and women because they have to ply their trade and feed their families. And I recognize how hard and competitive the sector is. But they make it so hard. Since this COVID pandemic started, I've been grateful for private transportation because to my mind, public transportation is a huge risk. Operators of these vehicles have to recognize the huge responsibility that they have for public safety. They have a responsibility to ensure that they remain safe and healthy since they can infect numerous people in one single trip. Maybe someone needs to sit them down and explain to them in those terms and why it's important that they follow the COVID protocols. I know we tend to be punitive and authoritarian first, so I would suggest showing them how huge a role they play in keeping the pandemic at bay, assuming that it hasn't already been done, of course. I refuse to believe that they're so ignorant that they would have to be locked up for their own and the public's safety.
You might be surprised.
So, Ayo, how you plan to show them the importance of their role in the public safety? You can show them a PowerPoint presentation. I just ask him because this COVID has been a learning experience for everybody. The way you put it, a van ride could be a super spreader event. Yep. Because at any one time you got a vehicle full of people who are getting off and going their separate ways to interact with different people at different times. You leave work, you might infect a whole set of people at work. You might go home and infect your family and then infect other people. One van ride could do it. But you know, COVID has been an experience of who takes it seriously, who doesn't, and how do you force people to take it seriously?
Mm-hmm.
You need to either lock them up or bring them on the show, right, Ayo? And you can lecture them.
I don't think that will work. But anyway, Ready Mix has joined the list of employers that have unceremoniously laid off workers. It has been reported earlier this week that they abruptly laid off the workers, and then as the workers tried to collect the document necessary to collect unemployment, that they were locked out of the building. Employers should note that COVID is a temporary situation, and this too shall pass. Government and the unions need to pay special attention to this ongoing situation and adjust the laws if necessary to protect the poor and the powerless. It is one thing for a company to have financial difficulty, whether from external or internal forces. It's a complete other thing to be devoid of humanity, short on communication, and that as though it's 1645. The people nor the client should ever forget these times.
True.
And hotel workers have united in their fight to receive severance payments owed to them. Workers from 3 establishments came together in protest, which, as was reported, the Prime Minister has stated is a deviation away from who we are. Well, as far as I'm concerned, who we are is the people who follow the law and compensate workers accordingly. We are a people who do what is right by the people, who help us to grow and to strive. But we are also people that have been forced to break the wheel of injustice through labor organizing and the use of protests and even riots. Our very labor parties were birthed from labor movements. It is unfortunate that this has to be a part of our existence, but when we are aggrieved and have used every available avenue without success, we take the next step towards organizing and causing as much discomfort as possible until we get justice. This should not stop the powers that be from working to make wrong things right. If protest makes them uncomfortable, then that should be encouragement to work harder and faster so that the people can pay their bills and put food in their bellies with the funds that are rightfully theirs. I support the people first and always. But let's look at something a little later for a minute. Here are some of the best memes and tweets this week from these internet streets. So I haven't got my hands on one of the commemorative dollars as yet. Perhaps that has something to do with me being an inessential worker. But if we are to take what this Twitter user's word, we've all been hoodwinked.
They're supposed to glow in the dark, right?
It's supposed to glow in the dark. So she's showing you a before and the after, and she's like, this is deceitful. Right? But let's wait and see though, because perhaps she got a bad one. I'm just excited to see what it
ask for
like.
her money back. She should return it and ask for her money back. I want my money back.
That's her money. It can still spend if it doesn't glow. But by now you've certainly heard that there's a number of vaccines on the market to combat the coronavirus. Well, this person has decided which brand he's trusting, and he says, congratulations to Pfizer on the new COVID-19 vaccine. The same company that makes Viagra. I have complete faith in this new vaccine. If a company can raise the dead, they can certainly cure the living. I begin to think that, man, like this should be the ad, so that people can actually start to trust the vaccine a little bit more, especially a lot of the men were saying they're not going to take the vaccine. Maybe we should use this as the ad. Who knows?
They heard.
Speak for yourself, Ayo.
Don't beat up me, I'm fine. And apparently there are healthy, vaccinated people the world over who don't trust vaccine. This Scottish woman shares an insight from her home country. And she said it's the same in Scotland. People don't trust the vaccine, but will buy drugs from Shady Kev with 2 teeth. I mean, no, that's true, right? But anyway, as a shop for Christmas, coming out of the pandemic, with all the setbacks, remember to exercise some judgment and some restraint, because your salary might just be judging you. Love her face. I think she's the cutest little thing ever.
Is this real? Are toddlers able to make these sort of facial expressions? That look like an adult facial expression, man.
Exactly right. Like she was down here forever.
She look like she's already an angry black woman.
All right, let's not push this. Let's not push it. She's a cutie.
She's a big expense. That's what she probably is too.
And now, on that note, let's here ends the weekly roundup. Viewers, please note that you have the opportunity to ask questions and to contribute to the program with your comments. Simply type them in the comment section below, WhatsApp us on 833-9886, or email us at jpourworldview@gmail.com. And please keep sharing this live and liking our page as we attempt to grow as organically as possible. We appreciate your help and their support. And now on to our main program.
Your story.
Well, before I get to the program, somebody in the comments, Sasha is saying that with the coins, you have to leave it in the sun for a little bit.
Really?
I guess that's how they work, glow in the darts work, don't they?
You gotta leave it in the sun?
I
Thought it
don't
was
know.
exposed as a light.
That's why I thought it was just easier to, anyway. I mean, we have nails. I forget where nails doing glow in the dark, and we go in the dark, they just shine. We have to leave them in light first. But anyway, moving on. Welcome to the main program. So as stated this week, I said it earlier really, this week we discussed political parties. Are they catalysts for change or are they inhibitors for change? Now, in this discussion, I have to emphasize, of course, that the leader of the political party has to be central to its transformation, and that the outcome depends on the people within the party, the prevailing ideology, and whether the change imposed is progressive or regressive. Here in Barbados, both the Democratic Labour Party and the Barbados Labour Party have been the main engines for change that brought us to independence, saw the implementation of many institutions that brought many social benefits to the masses. Both parties were operating in a time and space where the majority of change needed was for the most basic of human rights. We're talking about indoor plumbing, low-income housing, free access to education, school meal services, and so on. But once our bellies are full and we obtain an education and other basics, we develop different types of needs. And once our country matured, mostly due to the early interventions, as with the individual, the needs changed. And yes, there are pockets of people within the society who still require some of the most basic human rights. It's an ongoing project to eradicate poverty. It cannot be wiped out in one generation. But there are more philosophical and economic changes that become relevant. During its three terms, the Oinarka administration attempted to move the country forward by trying to grow and mature economically and to become competitive on the world stage. Whilst one can critique the main policy of privatization, we have to acknowledge that we all felt the winds of economic change. The better question may be on its sustainability. However, the past 10 years of Democratic Labour Party leadership has also seen many changes, most of which were so regressive that the state is still reeling from them as it attempts to recover even in the midst of a pandemic. The economic and social fabric took a beating, and as we all waited for the government to make decisions to ease the pains, it coalesced along party lines instead and became insular, blaming the international recession that had long passed, and it basically failed the people, it failed the state, and ironically, it also failed the party, destroying it as the progressive institution many Barbadians have come to know and love. So there are a few things that we have to consider. Whilst the concept of party lines is supposed to be ignored once in power or once a party becomes the government, we are dealing with human beings, and there remains the impulse to act in the party's interest. When the interest of the party matches the interest of the state, everyone benefits. But when it doesn't, there's conflict. So now we have a new and ultra popular government, the Barbadian and opposition in parliament, the PDP, and an opposition of the people, the Democratic Labour Party. And I say that because the Democratic Labour Party commands majority support of the people in comparison to the PDP. So their voice right now, if we could hear more of them, matters more than the PDP's. The Barbados Labour Party thus far in office has started to implement some brave changes, as it should, given its popularity, the removal of Nelson, the proposed decriminalization of cannabis, and same-sex unions are, to my mind, major, considering how conservative we are traditionally as a nation. But these are changes that in a 21st century world are minor, but absolutely necessary, and therefore the government should be supported. And I get asked often by visitors why certain things such as loitering are are not outlawed here, are outlawed here really. And I have to explain that these are, but it's also, this really makes for awkward conversation because I'm usually talking to white Europeans, right? And I'm explaining that these are archaic British laws that are actually breaches of human rights imposed at a time when we were thought of as being less than human. So it's weird that we have held on to them. So my first question to you then, Corey, is how much of a focus should government be placing on removing or changing archaic laws? And how does it do that whilst managing its other role as a political party and resist the urge to do what is politically expedient, but if it is not done, could be detrimental to the growth of the state, things like that.
That was a lot of questions. All right, let me see if I can remember the top and then deal with the bottom. I think, Ayo, that my short answer to your question, there are a couple of things that I wanted to lay down so that it kind of coaches everything that I have to say here this evening, it prefaces everything that I have to say this evening. Political parties, to me, are a vehicle. And in the Caribbean, I've come to realize in those 15 years that we mentioned at the top in my bio that, you know, a lot of our politics is personality driven. And having said that, to answer your question, no, every government that comes into play is going to be driven in large part by the leader or people who are perceived to be the leaders at the helm of the party. And they will come in with their ambitions on what they seek to do. But every political party also has to have some level of compromise. With the one that we have in power now versus the one that we had in power before, interestingly, they had a balance of power that is very different. If I'm referring to the most recent, the immediate past government, they had a balance of power that was very different, but they also behaved completely in converse ways towards the electorate. So if I can refer to that word compromise for a minute, the Barbados Labour Party would come in with what it was seeking to achieve, but I find it is a highly, highly sensitive government in terms of public opinion. And I would use the example of when they attempted to change those road rules out there in terms of the turn by price mark. Like 1 minute it was so, and the next minute it wasn't so. And that was the outcry that was based on the outcry of the public. You saw that happen with the COVID protocols and the way they opened back up after the quarantine, blah, blah, blah. No need to go further down that road. So in terms of no effecting change in terms of the existing legislation and the kind of old laws on the books that you're talking about, I think this government would have come in with such a large mandate in terms of addressing where the economy was at and some of the damage that would have been done by the previous administration. It's difficult to turn one's focus squarely and say, this is something that we're going to attempt to do. And as I understand it, going back and removing back laws that are just there sitting on the books is not an easy thing to do. It takes sittings of parliament, it takes debate, it takes discussion in terms of getting movement, the sort of movement that you will want to get those laws removed. So there's a law, I think, on the books about not being able to ride a donkey down the middle of Broad Street, something or the other, that is clearly is just as archaic as the one that you're referring to with the loitering. But in order to go back and remove that, it's like, what else do you put on the back burner? Any government of the day, if you are gonna go back and do something, that means that you're putting something in the present on the back burner. And another thing I should have prefaced by saying at the top is that we are so susceptible as a small nation, or any of our Caribbean countries as small nations, to the international events, what's going on in the international arena, that I often think we think our governments have a lot more power to act independently than they actually do. So I think that in order to move forward on what you're referring to would assume that, you know, we have pause in terms of international events, in terms of managing the economy, or right now managing COVID and all its various, you know, the fallout from COVID. Don't know why that word wasn't coming to me. It would assume that we have time, effort, and the labor intensity to be able to go and effect that kind of change. think I missed part of your question, but I am not sure.
I
Can you
think
repeat it?
I think you pretty much answered the question. I think the last part was that how does the political party focus on changing those archaic laws while managing its role, really, a principal role as the political party, the government really, and as a political party, and resist the urge to do what is politically expedient. In other words, you want to change the law, but there's such an outcry from different corners of the society. So you want to retain that support, but even though keeping this law on the book hampers the growth of the state moving forward, basically, and becoming a modern state, you are more you may be more tempted to just keep that law to satisfy those people to get that support.
Okay. As I listen to you speak, I couldn't, like, all that was here ringing in my head is the proposed same-sex referendum. And I feel like this is something that, in terms of our government, the way it postures itself, that Deveron might have something to say when I'm done. But yeah, the same-sex referendum, prime example, that's an old law. The buggery law is an old law on the books, but various governments don't dare touch it because of the perception that it's going to be unpopular. It's much easier to have it sit there and just continue to not enforce it, you know. And I think that that's the same for several of these archaic laws that we're talking about, because now the proposal is, as I understand it, to introduce a new law, which would be the same-sex marriage, and say that people of same sex are allowed to marry, whereas the same-sex, the actual intercourse aspect of same-sex unions is still outlawed, which is a weird arrangement. But I think the government of today saw it easier to do that, and I think is, to get back to my original point, reflective of the leadership of the party and the kind of vision that they have for Barbados, that was given priority, as opposed to going back and doing something which I think would have been much more constructive, which is striking down the buggery law and actually offering people protections. Mm-hmm. But there's a cynicism to it, to me, where it kind of appeals to the tourism product of Barbados. It kind of appeals to Barbados and it's sitting with international organizations and bodies, and it says, hey, look, we're proactive, we are progressive, and this is what we're doing, as opposed to you're kind of like throwing out a little twig when you were supposed to be offering people who are trying to keep the head above water a firm plank to hold on to. You're offering them a little twig and say supposedly doing this thing, but it really has ulterior motives. And I think that is reflective of the personality and the types of vision that leaders and their parties often come in with. So short answer to your question, Ayo, there are things that should be done, but I think that far more often the government will be seeking to achieve things that they want to see done, and then they will also be reacting to what the issues of the day are.
Since you called my name Corey, maybe I should jump in here. Interestingly enough, you pointed towards some of the veg issues and the divisive issues rather that we tend to face, the buggery law and other areas that our society, some may argue, may not be ready to address. So we must understand that we're coming out of a society that really focuses on a majority, and it's very difficult for minority views to be implanted into a political system. We understand that. But beyond the veg issues, you pointed to the fact that governments essentially cannot prioritize everything. Some issues are more important than others. For instance, the COVID situation right now, the economic situation right now, so we may not be able to focus on some loitering laws. But is this not reflective of the fact that we have found ourselves governing up against the wall constantly? There's never really room to focus on maybe the less important, or what some may consider the less important things, because we always find ourselves in a crisis, or we always find ourselves having to deal with the same age-old issues of economy, unemployment, and poverty. And my question to you would be, why do you think that for the last 50 years, we found ourselves on what seems to be a treadmill of dealing with crisis after crisis of the same issues, that we cannot then look towards more progressive governance?
Well, I don't want to answer your question with a question, but what will more progressive governance entail? I guess the way I see it is the way, again, I said it at the top, whereby our Caribbean countries, we came out of slavery, and then we came out of colonialism in 1966. And our politics were such as they were in 1966, and the respective brands of our political parties were based on that. They were based on addressing the issues of the day. They were based on being firm statespeople and being conciliatory and basing certain things on the working classes, the masses of Barbados, who on their own would struggle to keep their heads above water. So I think we kind of just remain in that state because, in a sense, we haven't got any bigger. We haven't got any more ability to achieve economies of scale in terms of the population we have and the private sector, and our ability to produce goods and actually what's the term that I'm looking for? Have food security in the way that we would like. All of these are still issues and realities for Barbados that will never stop being realities for Barbados because we simply haven't increased in size, and we're not going to increase in size. We're not going to increase in political importance in the world. I think we try to pick our spots by aligning ourselves with a China or by aligning ourselves as it stands with any international organization and forming voter blocks within the Caribbean. This is when they've heard of Barbados wielding its most power on the international scale. So I think that those are things where you can see Barbados, quote unquote, punch above its weight, like we like to talk about. But domestically, no, I think that at any one time we're talking about domestic policies, but the domestic policies kind of flow from the foreign policy and what's going on outside of Barbados at any one time. This government, for example, let's say that they came in, apart from wanting to change the landscape of Barbados, physically, because that's something that is obviously, it's clear to me that they intend to do. Mia Motley intends to remake Barbados in her image, but if they came in with the intention of removing some of these laws or being more progressive in terms of striking certain things from the books, Deveron, or introducing certain things like what they see as progressive, like same-sex marriage. Nobody saw COVID coming. Nobody knew that it was going to be an international issue. Nobody knew that it was going to force economies to have to adjust in the way they are. I think Ayo plans to touch on the workers who are being affected by COVID. So the government could not have planned for that. And I think that it would have inhibited, even though COVID is a mass pandemic, we've not seen anything like it in our lifetime. I think there's any number of issues like that crop up for our government at any one time that they have to respond to. This government came in having to talk about the IMF and whether or not we were going to have a structural adjustment program and how best to manage the economy. All of those would have been inhibitors to the kind of progressive policies that you're speaking about.
Interestingly enough, I would say though that Barbados is not 3 years old. It has had its independence for 54 years, and we've seen literally billions of dollars of intervention on the behalf of the state or on the part of the state. And there's still many, many insufficiencies or many inadequacies within our society. Despite these billions of dollars in investment, you spoke to the fact we don't have economies of scale. Fine, certainly there are going to be vulnerabilities there. But again, if we look over the last 50 years, where has the money gone? Certainly there has been progress in reduction of poverty, in education, in healthcare, certainly. But that, in many instances, is based on where you are and who you are. And there's still persons in this society that, quite frankly, could have been living 50 years ago because their circumstances have not fundamentally changed. So I feel as though, yes, there are certainly international issues that limit our ability to fix the domestic, but I think they're giving political parties a pass in the sense that there's been billions of dollars in investment, and in many ways the returns have not been what they could have been for various reasons. And I'm curious to what you think some of those reasons may be.
Well, I will, if I'm giving political parties a pass, I would be more interested to hear before responding how you would not give them a pass. What would that look like for you in terms of political parties responding the way that you think that they ought to have in the last 50 years?
Well, I have pointed to some of the issues, and that is legal reform, for instance. One of the main contributors within developing countries, not just Barbados, is the issue of corruption. And you have various estimates, but one of the more pronounced ones is one where it says 5% of our GDP is lost due to issues of corruption. That's, in Barbados terms, $500 million a year. is an estimate. It's not down to the exact degree. But you can imagine that 5% over a 50-year period or even longer, how much money has been wasted due to issues of corruption. And we've been talking, for instance, about reforms at the legal level, at the political level, to address these issues for decades, and they've not been addressed. So that's what I'm saying, for instance, that you've given the political parties a pass in many instances, because there are things that they have control over that have absolutely nothing to do with the international community that they can fix, that improve the lives of individuals, like the issue of corruption. Why have we not done more on issues like that, for instance?
All right.
I don't see. Sorry, go ahead, Ayo.
No, I was just going to reframe the end of the question and say, I think that he may be asking you if you think that that we could have done more, basically. Yeah.
Who you mean by we? The
the political parties and the government.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give political parties a pass. I just won't want that type of language to go out there. I don't give them a pass. But I would say at the end of the day that I guess when you work in the circles, it kind of strips away some of the romanticism. So I look at it as like, what was a political party? I'm putting myself in the head of people at the helms of political parties. What does the party have to gain by pursuing the kind of legislation that you're talking about, that by pursuing the types of reform that you're talking about? I'm not saying they're not a good thing. And right. I do think, listening to you, that if we had a party in Barbados now that came, third parties in Barbados. But anyway, let's say we had a party, for the sake of argument, that came along in Barbados. It was fresh and it was young and it was speaking to the kind of issues that you talk about. I don't have any difficulty thinking that Bajans would like this. I think that these are things that people want to hear. I think that these are things that people want to have talked about more, and we like the idea of them. But as a voting public, the things that we like, the idea of, like, that, to me, that's Barbadian culture. We like the idea of things more than we actually like them. So would people actually support that party? Do people actually want to see these things happen? And when they get in power and they start introducing the kind of legal reform that you're talking about, does it then begin to impact some of the same players who have put the money in their coffers to mount the type of campaign that they needed to get elected? I mean, these are the realities in Barbados that I'm talking about that don't go away. So Barbados in the last 50 years has changed tremendously. But I think some of the realities that exist, some of the dynamics, let's put it that way, not the realities, because the realities themselves would have changed, but the dynamics that allow political parties to be viable entities, I think remain the same. And like a complaint that I hear often, I could toss this one in the ring too. I hear up and down the islands people complaining that political parties depend too much on the concept of mendicancy and handouts, as opposed to teaching the man to fish, so that he's giving the man a fish, as opposed to teaching the man to fish so that he can go and catch fish and be a fisherman. And I think it is easier for political parties to do that. I think that political parties are Machiavellian at the end of the day. It's easier for them to do that than to actually do something constructive that would be more constructive 10, 15 years, even another 50 years from now, that people's children's children will be able to look back on and say, hey, you know that thing that Deveron Bruce was talking about on that show that actually happened? They actually carried that to course and they made this thing happen that people weren't exactly getting out on the streets and protesting for, but they thought it was a good thing for the future of the country. It's something that we needed to see happen after 50 years, and they made it happen. I just don't think political parties think like that. I think we think like that. I think that the politicians that we elect, we treat them less so this group now, that's in now, but up until this group, I found that politicians in Barbados were always treated as very cartoonish figures. And we get on like they're a different race, they're like the aliens or something, but these are people from the same society as us. They're pulled from the same society as us. They just, to me, think differently from the average person on the streets. And they're able to think in that Machiavellian way that I'm referring to. And that at the end of the day, they're going to do what the best things to ensure their own survival. If it's not in their interest to pursue legal reform in terms of corruption, because it might start to call into question some of the companies that exist towards their own well-being, they're not going to do it.
I hear you, Corey, because I think I agree with that point in that they're going to be very pragmatic or practice a philosophy of pragmatism with regards to a lot of these things. Legal reform is a burning issue, perennial issue in Barbados. But the point you made about a lack of time in Parliament, that makes sense to me. You know, we have limited time in Parliament, and if we were to go back to address some of these issues, which we should, because I mean, Barbados has on its books laws pertaining to Defamation Act, right? We have that, which makes it illegal for journalists essentially to do their job, right? And these laws, to my mind, don't really exist, right?
To be do investigative journalism.
Yeah, it makes it illegal. They face imprisonment. We have criminal defamation laws on the books in Barbados that really should be removed. But for the current government to prioritize removing that, which is a necessity in my view, of course, we're given parliamentary time towards addressing that issue and not addressing some issue in the current. So I hear you on that point, and I also hear you on the point that, you know, the parties are very Machiavellian, right? They're looking to simply do. It's a very cynical perspective to take on them, because we like to think the best about them, but perhaps it's true, right? We would not. Okay. Well, perhaps there's some truth to that, right? So the question I had for you, though, I think you kind of answered it, though, is concerning the whole legal reform, is why are they so invested in the status quo? But I think you kind of touched on that already. So they are invested in the status quo for reasons that you gave. So I think you've already touched on that. Ayo, any questions from the audience?
I don't have questions as yet, but I have some comments. Renee Holder is saying that Corey is making some good points. Let me see if I can look at my iPad. I know what's happening. Anyway, Renee Holder is saying Corey's making some good points on the hurdles of removing the buggery laws, to the government wanting to recognize same-sex unions to please tourists.
A very cynical way of looking at it, but it's.
I don't think that. Well,
You got to. Stay
away from cynicism. But yeah, I hear you. It makes sense.
But if you guys want to go on and answer some other questions before I come back in, that's fine. You guys can go on. Go ahead with your question.
I think we've kind of covered it. So we've discussed the theme of legal reform, law reform. We would love to see them make changes with regards to things like the Buggery Act, laws concerning loitering, and a whole host of archaic laws that we have on our books, but they're not necessarily going to do it for reasons such as the reasons Corey gave. Limited time.
I wanted to ask a question. I know I'm being asked the questions here. I wanted to ask a question. Why did the Democratic Labour Party, this has bothered me for a while, why did the Democratic Labour Party on the eve of the last election see fit to try and push through a law on the wearing of helmets when people ride their bicycles? Like, why that law? Why? Because as I said earlier, if you're focusing on one thing, that means you're not focusing on something else. They could have spent their last days in office doing some of the things that Devron is talking about, but they saw it fit. I don't have any issue with the safety of people, just put that out there, so you're protecting people's heads. But of all things, they chose to focus on that as opposed to focusing on myriad number of other things that they could have focused on. Why do the others here think that is?
I would not limit it to that specific law. What I would say is that political parties have found themselves representing very sectional interests because they have the public purse at their disposal, and there are many operating forces behind the scenes that, quite frankly, can benefit from the public purse and benefit from the ability of a political party to create law. And I think that's fundamentally what it was pointing towards. There's a lot of stupid things that happen because
you answering the same question that you asked me earlier. You answering the same question you asked me earlier.
But no, the thing is, it's not even about cynicism and Machiavellian. I mean, then the fundamental of a political party then it has failed. If you're going to tell me that a political party is Machiavellian and it's only acting in the interest of itself and the individuals within it, it has failed then as a political party, because the political party was designed fundamentally to represent national interest and a social interest and through a democratic process. So fundamentally, political parties in Barbados then, quite frankly, mobsters essentially, not political parties. It will have to be a mob.
But political, like I said earlier, a political party would only be considered to have failed if their interests don't align with those of the public. But when their interests align, then everybody wins.
Let me try to answer Corey's question though. So why would they have spent the last days in office passing that? Well, if I'm being naive, right, I would say, oh, they want to protect people's heads. If I'm thinking like Corey and being more cynical, they have a corner on the market for the Democratic Liberal Party funders. They're branding helmets. They have this segment of the market cornered, and they're making money from here. Is that the answer? Is that the answer you're looking for, Corey? Is that the answer?
I like the way you think.
It's a strange thing, right? But anyway.
No, I mean, this discussion that we're here having, let's look at where politics is now, and can we do an imagining of where it could be 10 years from now? Because I see a government ahead of us that is sitting before us that is very popular for all intents and purposes, right? At least 68% or 67% are what Tony Moore just managed to reap in the recent by-election. It's at least that popular. That's a high percentage as far as governments go.
Yeah.
But I'm still looking and I'm seeing a government that, to talk about Deveron's failing, what he referred to as a failing, not Deveron's failing, what he referred to as a failing of political parties. I mean, we don't see the current government as a failing as a political party, but when I look at it as an analyst and as a cynic, I see a government that is essentially a PR organization, and that is able to enact policy, because whatever it does, it tends to be very PR friendly. It sings from one hymn sheet. Their approach to the propaganda machine, if I can call it that, is admirable because it's always very cohesive. But that is what it is. I mean, we have essentially a one-party state, and I don't really want to say that thing on y'all show that I sit off air, so I won't. But what is our outlook for the next 10 years? If this is the state of play, and we're saying that political parties are supposed to be one thing, I will refer at the top to their origins in Barbados, and is a very righteous kind of statement to say where they came from and what they were intended to do, and to say that we've achieved this much thus far. But yet Deveron is able to say, no, we've gone into the conversation that they actually haven't served some of the purposes that they have. So what's our outlook? If this is 2020 and it looks good on paper, is what I'm saying, the government in front of us, what are we looking at for the next 5-10 years? We have an opposition that's struggling to be relevant. I think there's a very valuable opportunity present for that opposition to kind of like remake itself more along the lines of what Deveron is talking about, and Terry to some degree, in terms of being relevant to where Barbados is at now, as opposed to playing catch up and trying to join in it. You understand what I'm saying? Instead of trying to join into the BLP conversation, which is just predominating right now, you have an opportunity to create something new. Stop competing with that, because you can't win anyhow. And I kind of like, to me, same way, I forget who it was on the panel that was saying something, but I was thinking that sometimes, it was Io was saying when the desires of the political party and the matches with the state, that is when, can't remember the exact wording, but my point is that sometimes, very often, even if you take the current government as an example, sometimes that political party that's the ruling party takes the population and shows it, here's something that you needed. You didn't know you needed, but you need it. And I'm saying that there's a valuable opportunity for the opposition now to remain itself, the major opposition party, because they don't deal with that PDB thing. But the major opposition party, the one that is sitting and waiting to remake itself along some of those lines. But this would call now for, it's kind of like a 21st century conversation about 20th century things. And that's the opportunity that they think that they have. That's kind of what I'm interested to see how that develops.
The specific opportunity that you're talking about revolves around the layoffs that we're having. Is that what you're referring to specifically, or just the general context of COVID and what's happening in the country right now? Because
I'm not talking about COVID. COVID is is the issue of the day.
Mm-hmm.
The presumption is that it's not going to be the issue forever that the way it is now. So I think it would be a mistake in terms of branding to come and make that a central focus of what an aspiring political party is hoping to do. I'm referring more to the labor issues that you're talking about, and being able to speak to them in a way that the current government has not. I mean, you're talking about a government that is sitting now that said one thing with regard to workers and salaries before they got in power, and then said something else when they got in power, and they had all the cards holding, so to speak. So they have not reflected themselves to be that. The labor movement at various times has appeared to be more or less in bed with the political leadership. And that's an issue because sometimes the labor movements appear kind of toothless these days. So what can an opposition party that's out there sitting and waiting, what can they come in and do? There's a whole host of conversation out there for them to join into and to weigh into and to create their branding based upon. But I don't know, the opposition party that we're speaking about, the political aspirant. Somebody told me the other day in front of a live studio audience that I only ever like to attack them online. Yeah, when they blog and so on, I don't like to attack them. I would actually like to see them do well, but I haven't seen them within my political awareness, even long before I became a political analyst. They have just not done things in the last number of years that appeal to me as a simple voter or as an analyst. It's always like, what are you doing? Where are you doing it? What purpose is this serving? It's too short term. Right. And very briefly, because I know I've been speaking for a while, but very briefly too, when I was speaking earlier, I was thinking about political parties and how they select the people who represent them. Because in a sense, political parties don't really serve a purpose if they can't be elected, because they just end up kind of washing away. So they have to be viable. I think in the case of the Democratic Labour Party, let's look back on 2008 to 2018 and some of the people that they had sitting serving them. Chris Sinclair, Dennis Lowe, Ronald Jones, not Adriel Brathwaite, Dennis Kelman. You look at these type of individuals and you ask yourself if these people should ever have been in government at all. Like, honestly, in terms of the way that they operate, in terms of the level of cynicism and so on. And you then, by extension, ask yourself, how did the Democratic Labour Party, that is supposed to have such a strong branding, ever put these people in place to be the people that say, we're looking to have these people elected in order to represent our interests as a party and carry this party forward? Because they're not just ruling the country, they're also representing the party and they're presumably taking the party forward. So I get an impression once or twice removed that there was a kind of short-term view taken to things for the Democratic Labour Party, and they put people in place that they thought could win, as opposed to people who truly espouse the party's values. And it's up to them now to decide what they want to do long-term and how they're going to do it.
Right. So what you're basically talking about is some part of the regressive nature of the political party, where the interest at the time of election is simply to win election, to get people in position to basically win the seat. And that's why Christina is actually saying here that political parties fail if they fail to retain office and capture enough support from the public. Success of a party in gaining electoral support is not the same as success evaluated with democracy and the public well-being in mind. But we're discussing two things here. I think we're discussing the failure of a political party with regards to when it, how much change it actually creates within the country when it is in power. And then the other question here, because it seems because the broader discussion is really on the political party as a catalyst for change, the political party to bring to make a difference within the state when they are indeed the government.
Yeah, but Corey has raised the issue of opportunity for the Democratic Labour Party at this present point in time, and I think I have to agree that there is some opportunity, both with regards to positioning themselves as a party that could probably engage in the type of reform that Ron was talking about, but also reconnect that party. That party is supposed to be a mass labor party. Reconnect them back to the labor movement in general, using the particulars of the current circumstance, knowing that we're probably going to find ourselves in a situation in Barbados where more and more individuals are being laid off. So this is an opportune time for them to try to reconnect now, take control of now the labor movement and become that mass labor party again. I think that is an opportunity for them, and I think that the Barbados Party is well aware of it. Hence why Tony Moore is sitting where she is going to be sitting for the next 2 years. So,
at least
it's interesting, Terry, that you made mention of that. The people always mention the fact that an opposition needs to rebrand itself and resell itself and come with new ideas and what's not. But I always question whether that has ever been the case. Or have opposition parties always just sit back, be vitriolic towards the government, and essentially wait on it to fail, wait on an election, and try a thing, essentially. Because you're dealing with two labor parties that philosophically are not far apart, and within the context of the Barbadian society and economy, there's not many things you can do. So you can certainly maybe overpromise, but policy-wise, there are not that many things that you can do that the other party cannot think about, or the other party has not thought about, or the other party does not have someone thinking about at the same time. So in many ways, they're not interested in being productive as Corey pointed to before. They sit back again and hope for the government to fail and hope for a swing and an election. And they don't do anything that I think is really fundamental other than, again, be vitriolic towards the government. I would ask Corey, throughout our history, what oppositions have you seen essentially rebrand itself in a way that it has created an entire new idea around what it was? Has it ever really happened?
No, I can't point to any examples, but let me work my way towards a response. I want to make sure that I'm making sense tonight. Make it make sense, hashtag. But
I don't know what he did me laugh, but come on.
You're making sense.
Conversation good.
Sick of you, Corey. All right, so no, the thing with political parties and oppositions, one of the first things that was told to me when I joined this research as a discipline, political research, one of the first things that was told to me is that oppositions don't win elections. Governments lose them. Wherever you look around the region and you can see governments that have changed, that is the truth. I mean, I look at our election here and what we call popularly the red wash, and it's really a story. If you have discernment in terms of these issues, it's really a story of Democratic Labour Party. The last election, I mean, up until a few months leading into the election, the conversation that we ended up having by election time and since about the Barbados Labour Party was not nearly what it is. No, there was still questions about the kind of government that would be formed. There were still questions about Myanmar's leadership and what it was that she was ultimately looking to achieve. She was still getting criticism from the church and blah, blah, blah. I don't need to go back down that line. But the difference to me, Devron, is that here we are talking about a quote-unquote opposition, and we're being honorable by calling them that because they're not actually in opposition. They're sitting outside Parliament. They couldn't even get this by-election seat the other day. Not only could they not get it, they did not get close to getting it. So they're sitting outside of Parliament. So you have this opportunity now where you're not sitting in front of the people and having to perform. You're not having to oppose. And I do hate that about our politics. I really realized that in the last 10 years that an opposition party, really there's not a lot that they can do other than making themselves nuisances and calling to light things that they figure people should be seeing. So they just seem to be quarreling all the time, really, and trying to be trying to shed light, just trying to be informants and basically call out the parties all the time. And it can, the blah blah can get a little sickening. But at the same time, if they come out and they state their policies, this is what we propose to do. We're putting ourselves out there. People often complain, thinking voters, the intelligentsia often complain. We want to see, we don't just want to hear you criticize. We want to hear you say what you can do, what you would do, what you propose to do with the economy. What's your plan? And that's a great thing, and that's how it should be. But at the end of the day, the reality is if they come out and they reveal their hand too early, they will get criticized for the plan. That's what happened with Owen Arthur in 2013. He mounted a whole public information thing with the privatization thing. I remember forums at I think Springer Memorial School and panels, and it was very nice. It was very intelligentsia oriented. People like ourselves would have gone and sat down in those audiences and felt well pleased. But at the end of the day, they win the election. And that's to get back to, I think it was Christina, you said, Christine was commenting in the threads. Unfortunately, the two of those things go hand in hand. I always like, yeah, we would like this political party to be this catalyst for change. But the political party also knows that if it can't position itself to win an election, what is it really doing? The Democratic Labour Party know failure is no part of their brand, unfortunately for them. They gotta like work on that before they could work on anything else. They didn't just lose the election, they get washed away. So that's no part of their brand. And if you can't win after, well, it's like people gonna want to know what you're really doing. They're gonna think that you're a failure, so they're not gonna vote for you. Anyhow, Devon, to get back to your point, to me, sitting outside of Parliament and knowing, not only sitting outside of Parliament, but knowing, and I'm not going to be accused of saying that Errol Barrow's legacy is dead. Errol Barrow's legacy is not dead, but I do think Errol Barrow, insofar as his legacy is able to impact the fortunes of the Democratic Labour Party, that is dead. And it behooves the Democratic Labour Party and its representatives to realize this. So they're sitting outside of Parliament. The thing that was key and central to their branding all of these years going along and quote unquote identifying with the small man, the Finnish killed that off and stabbed up the meat from 2008 to 2018 anyhow. So they can't go back to that, but the opportunity is there. It's like, all right, let me look at it slightly different. Your question slightly differently. If they don't rebrand, if they don't take this opportunity to create a new face for themselves, what do they do? What branding do they have? To me, Verla de Pisa is trying to do just that. She tried to present Floyd Reefer as an earnest candidate, as an honest candidate. They tried to appeal to the heartstrings of voters as much as possible, especially with the cricketer thing, and that went down a wrong road for the BLP, and they tried to exploit that as much as possible. But before and since the by-election, before and during the by-election, nobody has an idea of what the Democratic Labour Party's brand is. And if we were talking about some of the issues, if Verla de Pisa had been talking about some of the issues that Terry is talking about. Do we know
what it is now?
Pardon?
Do we know what it is now after that by-election?
No, we don't know. We don't know. But I'm saying if before then, because there's not a lot that's being said about what it is, they'd be trying to keep the focus on Mia Mottley, which is unfortunate because one, her armor is impenetrable. And two, even if you're managing, all they're doing to me between them and the PDP is managing to make the electorate more cynical. So the average voter might decide, you know what, all these political parties is the same. And they may decide not to vote, but they're not flipping support. They are, if Verla de Pisa is pointing out issues about the BLP that people have an issue with, I think they're more likely not to vote as opposed to voting for her or voting for Floyd Reefer or whomever. So anyhow, if before the by-election had even become a thing, they had been speaking to some of the issues that Terry is talking about, identifying themselves with Labour movement, but in a new and different way that people could believe in, as opposed to like something warm over on the stove. Like, I think that would have had a lot more weight for them in terms of branding and in terms of appeal to the public. So you would then, when Floyd Reefer comes in, he's fitting into that, as opposed to you trying to appeal to Floyd Reefer and say you should vote for him because he has these attributes and he's representing the Democratic Labour Party, because people still don't know what that is.
Sorry, Terry, you want to go on? You want me to answer a question from the audience?
I think Deborah wanted to come back in.
Deborah. I gotta remember.
I was saying that that's actually quite interesting, Corey, because when we look at the electoral history, both the Barbados Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party have governed Barbados almost an equal amount of times. I think the Barbados Labour Party now has governed only one term longer than the Democratic Labour Party. So what I'm saying is that politics is a pendulum, and the idea that you need to sell yourself, let me not say that, people need to understand what you represent as a way to win the election is actually not the case, because we see before, again, only one instance in Barbadian history where a political party support went up for an election. So we can safely say, factually, political parties that govern will lose electoral support. And now again, you find opposition sitting, waiting their turn, as opposed to putting forward anything. So we have to challenge you on that idea because, again, you had an almost equal representation from both political parties. And only one instance where a political party increased its popularity. So the idea that Mayor Motley is impenetrable, history will tell you otherwise.
Just on that point, before you come back in, Corey, just to offer some support, I guess. In this current context, I'm not so sure that the Democratic Party can just sit back and wait. You're quite right in that, as we observe politics, not only in Barbados but everywhere, when a party seizes the government, forms the government, they tend to face, or they tend to be faced with compound errors, right? That lead to them bleeding support. That's true. That's natural. That's life, right? So we expect that you seize the government, and that over time your errors will compound. Maybe mismanagement of COVID, God forbid. Maybe you roll back on free education at University of the West Indies, God forbid. These compound errors could lead to you bleeding support, and then the opposition parties seize government. I guess what we are trying to, or what I'm thinking about now, is that can't really be a strategy in the current context of Barbados and the Barbados Party, 30 love, and the overwhelming support that Corey would have pointed to. Barbados Party just won the by-election, 33% of the vote, right? So, sorry, 63% of the vote. In the current context, Democratic Party really can't wait for these compound errors to materialize in order to get back in Parliament and be really challenging the Barbados Party for government, right? So maybe they can take another strategy, which is to try to offer maybe a package of progressive policies. You're quite right, Devon, when you mentioned that you have two Labour parties. So we have two Labour parties. They're not going to differ very much with regards to the issues, but we have pointed out some issues with the current governance of Barbados. The fact that we need legal reform. The fact of the matter is that we're going to be faced with a lot of layoffs, and the workers are going to need some additional support. So I guess in addition to waiting on the errors, and you're right, they can wait on these errors to materialize, wait on the hemorrhaging of support, and try to seize the government that way. That's probably going to take 20 years. Would they not accelerate that process by trying to create crises for the government and trying to offer a progressive package of alternative policies, in addition to reconnecting to their former base, heartland, the workers? I guess that's what we're this is what we're debating, really. What do you think? Do you think that doesn't make a little bit more sense and just waiting? Sit back and wait until the government loses?
Terry, I don't even think Deveron believed that the Democratic Labour Party could force it on. I don't think that. I know Deveron no better than that. I know Deveron, challenging the discussion and so on. But Deveron, the 5-star general that we've been talking about in St. Vincent, you don't just say that there's a 5-star general, that was 5 L's. That was 5 straight L's for the NDP. And sitting back and waiting hasn't worked for them. And all right, let's bring it back home to the Barbados Labour Party. Let's say that Glenn Clark got 80% of the support. I think the BLP as a whole got 73% of the vote in 2018 that was up for grabs. And no,
72%.
72, fine. And now Tony Moore gets 68%. So let's say in the next election they get 65%. In the election after that they get 60%. What is it serving in Democratic Labour Party? You're saying that they have support, sure, but what would it be served? I don't think I certainly don't think that that's how political parties. Yes, I think they feel like once you remain relevant, that your time will come. Yes, I do think that to a degree. I look back at the DLP in 2008. And in 2006, I was privy to information that, well, first of all, it came out in newspaper that they were still servicing debt from the 1999 election that the party had. So that was still a reality for them. So I don't think sitting back and waiting doesn't help you service your day-to-day issues as a political party. And then I was also privy to information that showed that one of the major issues that voters were continuing to hold against the Democratic Labour Party was Corey Sandiford and what he said in the 1991 election versus going to the IMF shortly after the election. And that was 50 years before. So I don't see how that sitting back and waiting. I certainly don't think that that's how they were seeing life, because they were also taking L's at that point in time. And for the viewing public, by L's I mean losses. So I don't think that is realistic. And now, on top of all of this, the current dispensation that we have in terms of the distribution of seats, in terms of popular support, is different from anything that's ever been in Barbados. And I don't
But
see...
not fundamentally further. That's the thing. Because if you look at 1989, you had a situation where the Democratic Labour Party had 2 seats, and in less than a decade, they had 20. My point is that political fortunes can change, and they can change quickly. So you must consider that as a possibility as well too.
I agree with that, but you got to show the people that you're a credible force, though. I think that by 2008, people wanted an alternative to Owen Arthur. They wanted a reason to give David Thompson a chance, but he still had to prove to them, to some degree, that he was ready and that he was worthy of that chance. I don't think that people just vote you back in because you are the government. I just think you would get less and less people. Sorry, you're the only alternative to the government. I just think you would get less and less people turning out to vote is what will happen.
Yeah, so I guess this slide here offers some support to what Davron just said, in that, over time, the parties tend to hemorrhage support. We have the Democratic Party share the vote historically. They were able to form government in 1961, 1966, 1971, 1986, of course, 1991, and again in 2008 and 2013, right? And where we don't have the stars, they did not form the government. And we see that over time, in 1956, they had 19.9% of the share of the vote. They were able to
just started.
Yeah, that's when they just started out. They were able to form the government after that. And so we've seen these ups and downs for the political parties. So I guess this is some support for what Davron is saying. Rather in the current context, because they can just wait and they will recover from this massive loss that they had in 2018 is another matter. This is the lowest point, just to reshare the slide again.
But is this enough? Is it enough to just sit and wait until...
Yeah, this is the lowest point since inception for the Democratic Party, right? This is the lowest point since inception.
And I think they're lower now in terms of perception than they were at election thing. But I haven't measured that qualitatively, but that's my personal belief.
It's possible. It's possible.
Sorry,
interestingly enough, one of the considerations I think we must think about is that the strength of the Barbados Labour Party in numbers in many ways can be its weakness, because in the context of Barbados, the state can only perform so much. And to have to carry 30 constituencies again will be quite difficult, because you do not have the amount of patronage and resources to share across those 30 constituencies. And Owen pointed to it, I think, in the early 2000s, when he said when he won I think he had 26 seats at the time. He said one of the most difficult things to deal with is to having to run 26 constituencies, because now you don't have the necessary resources to carry all of them again, and people will be able to make inroads based on the fact you have persons that are being carried by a popular leader. And that happened under this current government. Mayor Motley is extremely popular, but she carried a lot of persons with her. The St. Phillips of the world, the St. Lucy's, the St. John's, parts of the St. Michael's. She carried many of those individuals. And whether those individuals will be up to scratch in a COVID context where resources are depleted, unemployment is extremely high, and constituencies that have historically supported the Democratic Labour Party, whether they can carry them again to the same extent, we have to question whether that is actually possible. Only time will tell.
So, all right, so I answer some questions. Sorry, you want to answer first, Corey, and then I answer some questions?
No, not entirely necessary. I can't say how the real substantive point to me. I just want to respond, but that's fine. No, you carry on.
I gotta bring you back again. I think I like your conversation. Anyway, okay. So Sandiata is asking. I think the question about. Let me just stop trying to be cute.
I know where I may count this down the whole show. You need to be able to down the whole show. It was a countdown to this here happening. It was a countdown.
You need to be able to see and not just be seen.
I think that the question is about evaluating progress and positive change. We allow two main parties to dominate the political landscape. In my opinion, we should set the national goals and deadlines to achieve development regardless of party affiliation. Do we really understand how there is no more time and room for failure and damage? That's one question. I'll just read a couple first and then allow you guys to go at it.
Yeah, I have a thought when you're finished from again a viewer. Mm-hmm.
Right. Historically, I think we have changed parties 2 terms. After 2 terms, I think it'll be interesting to see how this will change on the mayor. And Christina is saying party seem that's Renia Holder on that one, please. The first one is Sandiata. This one is Christina is saying she's saying that parties seem to have a base of about 35%. The rest are of the people who switch sides and are not committed, meaning independents. My question would be whether the DLP base will actually shrink below this. Oh, if the DLP base has actually shrunk below this, of at 2018, or if 2018 was a blimp due to discontent even of its base, meaning, you know, if its base was also discontented, they would discontentment really. And just one question, one statement on the corruption. Renee Holder is saying that corruption is an issue, but the recent conversation being pushed is anti-corruption, and this is being pushed by organizations like the OAS and the EU. And perhaps at some point we can go back to that discussion on corruption. But let's try to talk about some of the questions that I put up just now. There was one that I saw earlier from Douglas Trotman. I'm not seeing it now, but yeah, I'll get back to it. Sometimes the comments drop out, guys. So if you feel like I haven't read your comment, feel free to just put it in again and I'll see it, I suppose. Yeah, so go ahead.
Right.
Okay.
I have like a broad idea of the questions. My attention span isn't that long, sorry, but I'm thinking about what Deveron said. I'm thinking about the government that Mia Motley has formed, as referred to by one of the commenters and one of the people on the thread, and just I guess where we're headed. I want to check in with you, Ayo, to see if this discussion as far as political parties and catalysts for change, if you feel like you're having that spoken to in the way that you would have wanted to have it spoken to.
I think that I think it's happening. I also have somewhere along the line of having this discussion, I realized that it's a discussion that we probably need to have again. I don't think that we can really thrash out all the issues that I would like to see thrashed out in 2 hours, right? Or rather even less than that, but it's going pretty good. I want to talk a lot more about leadership of the political party for a bit. For instance, how important is the leadership of a political party? And I think I said this earlier that change comes about when you have a strong leader, a visionary leader, someone who looks beyond what is politically expedient, I'll use that term again, and makes the decisions in the best interest of the state. So, you know, times have changed. People have they want different things. Society demands different types of things than it did some 50 years ago. What are some of the qualities that we should be looking for in political leaders? What are some of the qualities that they should possess, really, if we are going to have effective leaders in these times, people to take us into the future that we envision? And I asked you guys this as a panel because we are millennials, right? And the future belongs to us, basically.
I think I just missed out the definition.
I think she did too as well.
I googled the definition once. I missed it like by a year.
You're older millennials.
Very well, madam. I'm thinking about the leadership. I'm thinking about this latent support for the political parties. Let me deal with the comments first, and then I would deal with the leadership issue. So I can agree with anybody who tells me that the last election made the Barbados Labour Party appear, and the seat arrangement since makes it appear stronger than it actually is. I don't have difficulty agreeing with that. In terms of latent support, I think that so much happened in the 2008 to 2018 period that the Democratic Labour Party, I guess in a sense, they achieved to me the same thing that happened in St. Lucia with John Compton when he came back as leader of the UWP down there. But he didn't even last a full term before he passed. And that kind of set the party back in the sense that so much little foolishness happened during that administration in terms of the public and always appearing, just appeared disorganized all the time. It was always an issue. Like every day was an issue with them. That set them back then by years by getting back in. In other words, it's almost as though they would have been better served if John Compton did not come back and lead the party for that period and they win that election. They're better off sitting out, building and coming with a stronger case in the next election overall for their fortunes as a political party. Similarly here, to bring it back home, I feel like by the time David Thompson got in 2008, I honestly question how early the illness in his body actually began to affect him, because it was as soon as he became leader, or when he finally became leader, it was like we didn't see the fire that we expected to see. And his passing within 2 years, to me, almost like it kind of set the party up, because the same kind of John Compton effect. And they would definitely have been better off losing in 2013, because now to get back to the latent support that I'm talking about, to me, they would have managed to alienate their base a lot less if they had lost in 2013. But I think that so much foolishness happened during that 2008 to 2018 period that not only did they impact on the intelligentsia was sick of them. Not only did they impact on the masses, because you can't achieve that kind of result that you saw without the quote unquote masses of Barbados, the less thinking man's voter, but who votes nonetheless. You can't, or impacts the election by not voting. They had a change there, but I think more than anything else, they caused their support to stay home by alienating those people in various ways. And now the challenge that they have going forward is how they're gonna, I think they can successfully appeal to that kind of voter, but I don't think that they could just say sorry and move forward like everything is kosher. In terms of leadership, no. I suspect that Deveron will come back to something that I just said and I'm gonna come back to it. But anyhow, I'm gonna left it. You can, like, an interesting thing about leadership, I saw this happen under Owen Arthur and even more so now under Mia Motley, and this is the PR. Like, to me, Owen Arthur came to define what we expected a leader to look like in Barbados. And Frondell Stewart, for all of his faults, was being defined. I'm not saying that he was a good leader, but he was being defined in the Owen Arthur conversation, because he was not doing things that you expected a leader to do based on Owen Arthur and his operations between 1994 and 2008. Although people eventually got tired of that too, because there was a lot of stuff that went along with that. No, Mia Motley has come and changed the complete conversation completely. So she now defines what we expect a leader to look like. But being the rock star that she is, you can't compete with it. When they say that her armor is impenetrable, I say that in the sense that, to me, she is the Barbados Labour Party. You can argue that some of her ministers have profiles of their own, but the party goes as far as Mia goes. You remember at the beginning of COVID when Santia Bradshaw was addressing the nation, and Beijing's hated it. Beijing's hated how she was talking and she criticized what she was wearing.
Necessarily anything.
People was getting videos of people walking about in town, and Mia Motley had to come on, and her 90 people said, and address the nation and say, oh, when they're doing foolishness in her way, because she don't ever say it like that. But anyway, just encourage Beijing's along towards doing the right thing. So it's like, to me right now, parachly thought, but if something were to happen to our prime minister, I think the party would be in disarray. And I think that the entire nation would be in disarray by extension, because the national confidence that we have is based on her, which is also being impacted by COVID, but, different conversation. So now to get back to Ayo's question, leader, you can't compete with Mia Motley. You can't out Mia Motley. You can't Mia Motley better than she can. So that is futile. You have to come in now and you have to create a conversation of your own. I think you have to be very clear in terms of communicating to the public where your priorities lie, limit yourself, and make sure that there's something relevant to voters, yes, but hammer those continually so that you know that if it's Deveron Bruce, you know that Deveron Bruce stands for these three things. And you will also have an idea of where he would stand on other issues that he may speak about less, but you know he stands where he stands on these three things. You know what type of man he is. And I think that that is key. Rather than any particular quality, I think it is key that I think what Caribbean voters really care about, and is to get back to earlier we was talking about third party, and if they came along and they formed the kind of conversation Deveron was talking about and Terry was talking about to some degree, whether people would actually vote for it. People ultimately vote for the bottom lines, or what they see as the bottom lines. So that leader now has to come around. They have to be able to compete in terms of messaging and communication, PR, image. I don't like it, but that's the way things are. And they're also gonna have to like prove that they're a man or a woman of their word, because the electorate has now reached a point where social media rules, you can Google things and people know this. So, excuse me, you have a situation where you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is as a leader of an aspiring political party and show people that, yes, PR, okay, your PR is telling them this, they're seeing it, but you have to prove it too. You have to kind of like show that you're willing to carry the weight, so to speak. But I think the three things, I'm just shooting a number out there to keep it small, that those things are what will ultimately matter to the public and how it is communicated with the public.
Well, one of the questions was along the lines of whether the Democratic Labour Party will fall or has fallen, I think, below 35% or something in that direction. What I would say is that there have been about 12 elections in Barbadian post-independent history. And in only 3 instances did the political party fall under 40%. That would be 2018, 1999, and 1994. 1994 was unique because you had the NDP at the time, so the performance of political parties would have been distorted. So it's safe to say that history says both political parties have 40% support. If you are gaining 72% of an electorate in a vote on an election, trust and believe that the Barbados Labour Party got a bunch of Dems voting for them. I will say that. So I don't think that it has reduced to the point that it would not return come next election. But again, Corey pointed to the strength of Mayor Motley and her leadership. And I don't think there's many things that you can refute in his response. What I would say specifically to the Democratic Labour Party is that they need to work on organization, they need to work in communication, and they need to work in succession. Because we've seen historically the Democratic Labour Party organization-wise internally, when they have had a death of a leader, it has caused a lot more fallout than the Barbados Labour Party. We've also seen more challenges against the leaders in the Democratic Labour Party. So Sandiford was challenged prior to the 1991 election. He was challenged after the 1991 election. Then you had Clyde Maskell, who was challenged as the leader of the Democratic Labour Party. Then you had Farnell Stewart, who was challenged with the Eager 11. And for some reason, the Democratic Labour Party has not been able to solidify its leadership within its own party. Why that has been the case, I have absolutely no idea, but we've seen certainly more challenges against the party leader for the Democratic Labour Party than the Barbados Labour Party. Now, although we speak about the strengths of Prime Minister Motley, we must remember that she was removed as opposition leader as well too. And some of the reasons that surrounded her removal, maybe the Democratic Labour Party needs to tap into that and see whether or not they can reduce her popularity, or whether that's the direction they want to take to begin with. But she's not impenetrable, Corey. I have to refute that, because in a very short period of time, much has changed in her favor, and quite frankly, it can go in the opposite direction. But specifically on leadership, I definitely agree with you, but the Barbados Labour Party is certainly somehow better at dealing with leadership issues than the Democratic Labour Party, for whatever reason. I'm not sure why.
Quick comment on this point. So I have a comment from a viewer who I think agrees with you, everyone. Mia is not the BLP. That's wrong. Caribbean people like strong leaders, and that's what she is. She needed the party's machinery to come to power, and she learned that when she was ousted as leader of the opposition the first time. So I guess that's kind of consistent with what you said. And then I have a earlier comment, I guess speaking back to the relationship, the discussion we were having before You all are making the assumption that these parties have vision and strategies. There's no evidence of this. Look at how they manage their own parties. I guess, the constant challenges is an example. We have no professionally modern run parties, management operations, databases, and so on. It's all ad hoc, and this is how they govern. And ad hocracy is what the commentary is saying. They're both reactive. Both parties are guilty of this. They both need to transform their parties into professionally run organizations. So I guess that's a comment. I don't know if we agree totally, but yeah, that's a comment.
I agree, but what's the incentive? What incentive do they have if they figure that is working? Which is, to get back to my point, why I see, if anything, this is a time for Democratic Labour Party to decide to do things differently, because it's not, their current setup is not working for them, clearly. So if they're going to change in the kind of ways that we're here discussing, if that is what is going to be effective, and they have a sense that is what is going to be effective, now is the time to do it. But I only think a political party is going to change their ad hocracy if they think is within their political fortunes to do so. I would like to say that in terms of impenetrability, Mia Motley, I see her. I don't think anything is gained right now by making her the focus of what you're doing, because I don't think that
upset a few people with that, saying that right now her armor is impenetrable. A few people.
Well, that's all right. That's.
I know where it's coming from. I get what you're saying, and obviously no one is impenetrable, right? But I get what you're saying right now. She is very, very popular, and Devron's suggestion, pointing at him as though he can see me, but anyhow, Devron's suggestion that the Democratic Labour Party use what happened. Sorry for cutting you, Corey. We'll come back to you now. Use whatever was used to ouster some years ago. I think that would be failing at this time, because I think the party has evolved quite a bit since that time. And I think that would be a waste of time and effort and energy on the Democratic Labour Party's part. But yes, Corey, so you can carry on. Just wanted to say that I get what you were saying when you say that right now she's impenetrable, especially from the PR perspective, the marketing perspective, the way how the entire party has more or less coalesced around her, and the ultimate support that she gets from the people, and that's been proven again in the last election. And if it's one thing that doesn't lie, is that numbers don't lie, right? But yeah, let's carry on.
To everything Ayo just said, let me add the standing of, or lack thereof, of any of the parties that sit, the one that sits within Parliament and the ones that sit outside. They don't have the standing to achieve it. So when I'm saying she's impenetrable, I don't mind upsetting people, but I'm not saying that I'm not saying she doesn't have weaknesses. I'm not saying that she can't be criticized. I'm not even saying that how people perceive her now may have changed from the ears that they had around her when she first got into office. But having said that, was the standing of the DLP, was the standing of the PDP, was the standing of any of these small parties that have never been able to muster more than a couple hundred of votes? Like, you make your strategy to tap Mia Motley. No, you don't have the standing to gain anything from doing that. I don't find that anybody who has attacked Mia Motley versus the piece of being primary amongst those has gained anything from doing that. As I said, I think that ultimately all you're doing is making people more jaded about the politics, which will just lead to more people staying home. And if at the end of the day, the Barbados Labour Party is still able to motivate the most numbers to vote for them, they will still get back into office. And then to get back to the point, the Democratic Labour Party is their interest just in flipping the seats that were within their reaches and that they should rightfully have won in 2018. And I say rightfully, quote unquote, in terms of having more support in these constituencies. Is that their ultimate aim? Do they really want to get by with 4 or 8 seats? Is that what they're looking to do for the next couple of elections? I don't think so. But I mean, we're talking about political parties this evening, and one of the things that I wasn't sure whether it was going to come up or not, but I always think touched on it, is succession planning, or was it Devron, or a combination of both of you? I look across the region in the last 15 years, and I see a scenario where, to my mind, no leader can stay in power forever. I'm really diametrically opposed on a personal level against leaders who just decide, I can just stay here until. But at the same time, very often when they do step aside, the person who replaces them just does not appear ready. too inexperienced, they may enforce errors, blah, blah, blah. So you had all these cases in the Caribbean. Y'all remember about 10 years ago? Can't remember exactly. Was it maybe back around 2006 when the government changed in St. Lucia? But there was this time when we were talking about winds of change in the Caribbean. Barbados was one of those that changed the Democratic Labour Party government. The government changed in St. Lucia. The government changed in Grenada and places like that. But then the governments that got in struggled. The Dems, by all intents and purposes, should not have won in 2013. The government of the day did not win in 2011 in St. Lucia. The government in Grenada got in 2008 and it then lost in 2013, I think it was. So it was like seeing the natural order of things proceed in terms of how you think this should proceed in terms of politics, but then the alternatives were not great. So within your political party now, I just don't look across the region. First of all, on the part of the voters, I see like great cause for cynicism, because I see people who want change, but when they vote to get it, they don't get what they were looking for, and they quickly have to go back. And I suspect in a lot of cases, a lot of people who voted for change probably just end up staying home the next election. So you just end up with a jaded set of people in your electorate, and your turnout just decreases from election to election, unless something being a cataclysmic happens. And then at the party level, I think that these parties struggle to, because of the way leaders work, you come to understand that very often the person that gets installed as deputy is not somebody that's seen as an heir in waiting, because you never want to make the person behind you that's perceived as the heir apparent. You never want to make that person too strong. And then the leaders tend to reach this point where they see it as more within their interest to kind of attack that person, either directly or indirectly, than to promote that person. And our politics suffer for it as a whole. So in terms of leadership of political parties, I think that, I guess, succession planning and the realities of our politics is a nice to have. It's something that we as voters would like to see. It's something that the political parties, for reasons that probably serve the leaders and nobody else, don't like to see in terms of proper succession planning. But I think it's a key element of political parties being continued forces for change, because you see the BLP going in a completely different direction from what the BLP would have done, the previous administration would have done, and it has completely different realities to contend with, and that is what you would want to see from a political party, I think.
A further comment here. It's more connected to the conversation we were having before, but just for your benefit, so these are the generations. Right? You can decide where exactly you fit.
You actually went and got this.
Oh,
So the comment is this, right? That from Generation X, from Generation X back down to the Gen Alpha, they're more interested in issues, not parties. That's the comment we have here. So Gen X. So you can say where you are. Perhaps.
So they overlap. You end up being two at the same time.
So we have Generation X and the X at the.
Oh, I'm definitely. I'm iGen. I'm iGen.
The iGen. Oh, you're one of these. Okay.
I'm iGen.
Gen. Okay. Okay.
I'm a Zennial.
Okay, Zennials.
Or X-Zennial, whatever it is. Or no, wait a minute, Generation X. Anyway, I don't get it.
Generation X. But I mean, there's Generation and then the Zennial. It makes sense because it means that we definitely will be Zennials, Corey. Yeah, because we don't think like these Generation Xers, and we certainly don't necessarily fit into the, let me speak for myself, millennial. I mean, definitely not boomers. So I like the idea that they've actually come up with a category for us who kind of float somewhere in between.
I've never heard people make reference. I've never heard reference to the qualities of millennial and see myself in them. So
there you go.
It is interesting though. On the question of leadership, I'm questioning whether or not we place, I don't want to say this, but that we may place too much emphasis on a specific leader and less emphasis on those who surround them. So I think one of the issues that we tend to face is that when a political party is out of office, particularly for longer periods, their ability to attract quality candidates diminishes because they're not in a position to maybe offer any spouse of the state to attract the quality candidates. But at the same time, you've had some person like David Thompson, who many may consider a good communicator. He was young, he was fresh, and those various aspects. But yet, him as a leader was unable to attract quality candidates around him at the constituency level. So is leadership really and truly then the ultimate consideration that must be made? Or do we have to consider whether or not it's the persons that surround that individual that matters as well too?
Well, oh, this is for Corey?
No, you go ahead, Ayo. I have thoughts, but go ahead.
Okay. I'm thinking that, I'm just going to say this because Corey is a guest, so I don't want me to answer any questions. But for some reason, I feel the need to talk on this one because it's an important one. Number one, if you're a strong leader, you surround yourself with strong people. If you're a great leader, you surround yourself with great people, right? And if you're a great leader and you surround yourself with great people, regardless of if that is a threat to your leadership or not, is a testament to who you are as a leader. If you can control and bring those people together, and I use the term control very loosely here. I don't mean control. Yeah. But if you're the type of leader who basically feels threatened all the time, and feels as though you have to bring people in who you can control with that connotation that I was viewed, the other type of connotation, or that you can keep in line who aren't a threat to you, then the entire organization suffers as a result. And I say organization meaning whether it's but we definitely talking political organizations right now, right? So, but I was gonna say whether it's a business organization or otherwise, but we definitely talking political organization. And difficulty with that is that in this instance, in the political instance, the entire country suffers as a result. And we go back to the Democratic Labour Party, the last Democratic Labour Party that is, and what Corey was saying earlier, a lot of those people, I mean, it was like, these people were really in charge of this country for true. and that was the general thing. Sometimes when you heard them speaking on Solomon platforms, you're like, this person, anybody could be. Well, you think that so many, at least this is what I think, that there's so many political parties in Barbados today because everybody started to feel like, wow, the bar is so low. All of us, any of us can be politicians right now. Any of us can start political parties because they made the process of being a politician or the job of being a politician, the act of being a politician, the act of being in government seemed like anybody could do it because they were so bad.
I can agree with that to some degree. I do think the last election was the perception of the Democratic Labour Party government, but not only Dems, but also the perception of the Bees. And this is funny now, as I was saying earlier, to see the Bees where they are now. I think the perception of the Bees was such that made people in those political parties that popped up feel as though they had a chance. Like, you definitely didn't want this government because they knew the government was unpopular, but the Bees ain't really like convincing people either. So like, give me a chance because we here and we are not them. We ain't either them. There was a sense that people wanted something different entirely. But I do think that was based on the weakness of the government at the time. And I do think that you have leaders who get in, and I think that they may think one thing and they think they may operate the types of ways that Ayo is referring to. But I think leaders change over time though. Like, I think their priorities, their sense of priorities, I think their sense of reality definitely changes over time. So I think that the Owen Arthur that got voted out in 2008 is entirely different from the Owen Arthur who was in the mid to late 90s. And by the way, nobody ever thought that Owen Arthur was going to become the leader that he will become, which is another funny story, but no time to get into that now. Mm-hmm. I think leaders change. That's my long and short. So we're talking about strong leadership and surrounding yourself with strong people. Who knows? My perception of the Barbados Labour Party that is very, very headstrong, but then after that, we kind of struggle to identify certain other things with any clarity. But that could be their downfall. Who knows? I don't know why the current leader has sought to structure things in that way. Maybe that will change as time goes on. But I do think that leaders change. So, whoops. I swear I put that on silent, Anyway, my apologies. So you have a situation where you might get in and you have these priorities and you say you're going to surround yourself with strong people. I'm going to use myself as an example. I want to be prime minister. I lead in my party. I got Devron and I got put Terry and Io around me. And then I get in, and after 5 years, and I get accustomed to this power thing, and I think that certain things that are privileges are given to me and whatnot. I look around me, I see, I don't trust Io, I feel like I move she from that ministry. I feel like she shouldn't be AG. That again, she too much power. That again, she too much as a spokesperson for the party. I feel like I put she in the Ministry of Economic Affairs. And you see that one, Devron? He's questioning what too much of what I'm doing. He's challenged me all the time and come up with opinions that appear to be running counter to mine in the public and saying, God, move he too. I think that's what happens, and that's why we have the poor succession planning that we're talking about. So I think that we, the public, and I'm bigger than just talking romantically about the public, but I think that governance-wise in the Caribbean, and as I say, it's a sad story. I feel like they have like within each Caribbean country, we talk about electoral turnout in the 60%. That 30-something odd percent that we talking about that don't come out and vote. These are people who ain't interested in politics for one reason or another. And I think we're talking about some very jaded people with the two-party system. And the two-party system might appeal to people more if, as time went on, the political parties kind of like transformed and proved themselves more reflective of the realities of the day, as opposed to a situation now in Barbados where you have one political party that's ruling the day, but they're not just ruling the day because they're that sexy, A lot of the reason why they're ruling the day has to do with what the other political party became is a two-party conversation, even though it appears to be a one-party one. That's what got us here where we are. We all the way, or appear to be all the way in love with this particular partner that's supposedly doing all the right things and not just doing all the right things, but telling me about them every single time to do them too. Don't miss out that point. But that's because we fall completely out of love with the other one that was just beating me all the time and mistreating me all the time and just like telling me wrong things and like daring me to tell them something wrong about themselves. And that's how we got here. And I can't blame a voter who looks at that political situation and says things don't ever really change. Nobody ever really comes along and speaks to the issues in the way that I want them spoken to. I don't see these parties structuring themselves in a way that really changes things. Poor people just remain poor, and they never really show me that they're truly invested in going beyond repairing my roads or making sure that my garbage gets collected. They don't ever really show me that they're developing me and my family as people and our lot in life by extension.
All right. We're approaching the time where we close off soon. So Devron and Terry, you guys want to make any last statements or answer any last questions?
Hey, Devron.
Well, question-wise, I would ask what you guys think about this concept of leadership that includes the politics of inclusion, essentially. Whether or not that is something that's reflected within multiple political parties, or is it just one political party we've seen that approach, and what do you think is behind that politics of inclusion, whether it's necessary within the discussion of succession planning, within the discussion of surrounding yourself with quality individuals and those various aspects?
Can I answer? I talked too much last time. I admit this is my closing statement. You're the guest. You're here to answer. What's going on? Right. I think that politics of inclusion, I think Devron asked this question knowing full well that we tend to associate that with the BLP. One will have to ask if the Democratic Labour Party was not enabled to include people in the same way that the Barbados Labour Party typically has when it is at the helm. Why it is not able to appeal to people in the same way. Under me and Motley, I find it so far what I've seen of it appear extremely crass, like it out in the open and nobody trying to hide it. in ease and doing it in a little 6x4-inch block in the newspaper is like headline news when it happened in the way that is taking place. But under ONR, it was definitely to me about stifling opposition. It was about bringing this voice that could speak out against you, or this acumen, this intellect that was somebody who could logically say things against you. It was about bringing them people in the fold and making sure that they were taken care of. With Mia Motley so far, I'm getting her administration, I should say, and I don't mean putting on her specifically, but I'm getting more the sense of two things. One is difficult to resist, and two, as I keep saying about the BLP, and as we see reflected with a Tony Moore popping up as a St. George North candidate, now is the time to run to the table. People like to be associated with success, and the BLP appears to have success in a way that no other political party has had success. Again, Deveron, they say appears, but people want that. Is like, now is the time. If I ever had interest in politics, now is the time to run to the table and try and get a piece of the pie. But politics of inclusion, big picture, and this is my closing, I think is something that all of us should pay attention to more, because it's always more insidious than it appears to be. It's like, oh, George Conley and Rodney Grant over by the Barbados Labour Party. No, that's something that should be important to you. That's something that you should pay attention to. That's something that should mean something to you in the grand scheme of things in terms of political actors, and when they end up over on the other side, what that means for us as a voting people, as a nation. But I will also say too that I think in the long run, if we're talking about penetrability, to get back to what has become the theme of the day, that could ultimately become their downfall. Because to me, the more people you bring on, the more bloated you appear, the more mouths you got to feed. Deveron talked about covering 29 constituencies or 30. And that's going to be a hard thing to sustain going forward, keeping all of these people happy, keeping them from speaking out against you, backbenchers and people who ain't even holding a seat in parliament, just having the capacity. They're supposed to represent you, but they could also get out in public or social media and do whatever they have to do and embarrass you.
Yeah. You need to be wary of the Greeks bearing gifts, I guess is what you're trying to say. But to answer Deveron's question, though, I would say that politics is a game of inclusion. So the whole idea of a politics of inclusion, but of course, politics is a game, I think, of inclusion. The last question I have for you, though, Corey, I know you said that was your closing gambit, but one quick question. Given everything you said, what grade would you give, you're on the theme of leadership, what grade would you give the ruling Barbados Labour Party, and what grade would you give the Democratic Labour Party leadership? You can be specific about the actual leaders, the personalities involved, or you can be more broad if you like. So it's completely up to you. But what grade would you give leadership of these two mass parties in Barbados?
To pick out a grade, first thing I would just say, I think I have a problem personally when a leader start appearing in my dreams. Like when a leader start appearing in my subconscious, I know something wrong with that, the way that PR machine working. And
who are you dreaming about?
There's only one leader that we've had in recent times that, based on the way that she is PR, she would pop up in my dreams. Like, that's how bad it get. Like, what are you doing here? Even in dream, I knew that she wasn't supposed to be there. But anyway, it's like, wherever you go, wherever you turn, this person is everywhere. This person does everything. You ever observe this person's social media activity and the number of things that she's appear at? Like, micromanagement central. So anyhow, get back to the point, answer your question, short answer. I want to give this government a good grade, but the good leadership that I would be giving would be in the context of the previous leadership, which is the issue, I think, by extension, that the whole electorate is having. So I want to give them a B, but there's something that bothers me so much all the time, like all the time, that I just feel deep within myself, like, I just don't like this. I just don't like the way that this plays out. This feel like PR and gloss. This insulting my intelligence, because yes, it's supposed to appeal to my intellect, but I'm smart enough to know better. So I will give it a B minus. That's the grade. That's the BLP. The Dem leadership can't get through. People think I attack the Dems. I don't attack the Dems, but I don't like what I see. I don't like what I see. I think it's at a low point in its existence. I think it's lower now than it was at election time. I don't think the current leader is the leader for the times that they need. And if she comes away with a 030 in the next election, they won't be able to blame that on front of throat no more. That'll be hers to hold. So anyhow, I give her a failing grade. I can't give her anything other than an F.
No, I can't disagree with you either. Ayo?
Well, that's it for me. And it is now, I think it is now 7 o'clock. Yeah, 7 o'clock on the dot. So as we come to a close, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening in the audience. You guys have been great again. You stayed by us and you you asked some really good questions. And just one before we go, Christina is saying, students, be happy. These guests don't grade your work, because last week we had some grades that were crazy too. Not last week, the week before. So, yes. And as we come to a close, I want to thank those of you who took the time to join us today and for staying with us, sharing the video, your comments, your questions, your ideas. If you enjoyed this episode, please share. Invite your friends to join us here next Sunday at 5 p.m. To my co-hosts, Terry and Devron, thank you both for being here and the hard work that you both put in to produce the show so successfully. And thank you so much, Corey, for being such a great guest. Fantastic. And I hope definitely that you'll come again. So
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Take us away, Terry.